When the United Nations imposed unprecedented sanctions on Ibrahim Traoré, thinking they would isolate the young Burkina Faso president, they couldn't have predicted what would happen next. What started as international punishment became the catalyst for the most powerful display of African unity in decades. Tonight, we reveal how a calculated move to weaken one man accidentally strengthened an entire continent, and why global powers are now scrambling to undo what they've done. The morning sun cast long shadows across the corridors of the United Nations. Headquarters in New York as diplomats hurried through marble hallways, their faces etched with concern. In less than 24 hours, they would make a decision that would backfire spectacularly, creating the very outcome they were desperately trying to prevent. The air conditioning hummed softly in Conference Room 2046, a nondescript meeting space tucked away on the 20th floor of the UN building. Unlike the Grand Assembly Hall, where cameras captured world leaders addressing humanity, this room was designed for conversations that would never see daylight. The heavy oak table reflected the worried faces of 5 men who represented some of the world's most powerful nations. Ambassador Richardson from the United States adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as he studied the classified intelligence report spread before him. The document, stamped with red letters reading "Eyes Only," contained detailed analysis of Ibrahim Traoré's recent activities that had alarmed Western capitals from Washington to Paris. "Gentlemen," Richardson began, his voice carrying the weight of years spent in diplomatic corridors, "we have a problem. Traoré isn't just another African strongman we can manage with the usual playbook. His anti-colonial rhetoric is spreading like wildfire across the continent." The French representative, Ambassador Dubois, leaned forward, his manicured fingers drumming against the polished wood. "The situation in Burkina Faso has moved beyond our comfort zone. Every site Claire visited ended up compromised, not always destroyed but exposed. Rebel groups who had hidden for years suddenly found themselves outflanked, targeted, eliminated. Yet she always walked away unscathed. Not once had her convoy been attacked. Not once had she needed extraction. At first, the assumption was a leak in military communications, but encrypted networks held firm, no breaches, no bugs. Then came the realization that chilled even Yarrow. What if the leak wasn't technical? What if the intel wasn't stolen but given? Claire's laptop, her satellite phone, her tablet, all allowed under NGO clearance, could quietly transmit geolocation data without triggering suspicion. Her presence wasn't a risk. It was the bait. The perfect Trojan horse, masked as empathy, Yarrow. Brought the findings to President Traoré in silence. Traoré didn't look up from the map on his desk. His fingers traced the next likely target. Claire was already scheduled to visit it. His voice, when it finally came, was razor thin. "Pull surveillance from her hotel. I want to know who she calls at night." The sun was already sinking over Dori when the ambush hit. A military convoy transporting wounded soldiers from a skirmish near the Niger border was blown apart just outside the city's edge. The route had been classified. Only 4 people knew the timing, and Claire Morrow had met with 2 of them earlier that morning, bringing supplies, checking names, asking detailed questions under the guise of coordination. Captain Yarrow stood over the wreckage that night, the scent of diesel and blood still thick in the air. A young lieutenant's body lay crumpled against a tree, his hand still clutching a radio. Yarrow's jaw tightened. He didn't need orders anymore. The pattern wasn't a pattern. It was a signature. Claire, of course, was unharmed. She had left Dori an hour before the attack, citing unforeseen scheduling changes. Her driver confirmed the alibi. So did the hotel. But her satellite phone pinged just 5 kilometers from the site, 15 minutes before the bombs went off. President Traoré received the report in his private quarters. He didn't speak. Instead, he paced the tiled floor of his residence in silence, eyes narrowed, voice buried somewhere deep behind clenched teeth. Claire's face was on the cover of a French magazine on his desk. "An angel in Africa," the headline read. He flipped it over. Later that night, Yarrow waited by the compound gates as Traore emerged, jacket in hand, eyes like steel. He didn't bring his ministers, no press, no convoy, just Yarrow, and a decision heavy enough to shift the course of a nation. "She moves again," Traore said, stepping into the jeep. "We follow." And as the engine roared to life, Yarrow asked the question that had haunted them both for days. "Do we arrest her for what she's done, or for who sent her?" Ouagadougou Airport pulsed with its usual chaos. Vendors shouting, luggage carts rattling, foreign aid workers shuffling through security in pressed linen shirts. Claire Marot moved calmly through the terminal, scarf tucked neatly over her shoulder, passport in hand. She smiled at the guard who waved her through priority clearance, unaware, or pretending not to be, that two plainclothes officers were trailing her every step. Captain Yarrow stood in a maintenance corridor overlooking Gate 3, earpiece in, watching through tinted glass. President Traore waited in a black SUV outside the terminal, engine running, his silence stretching like wire. The team had orders. No noise, no spectacle. But when Claire's suitcase went through inspection, the mood changed instantly. The customs officer paled. Inside the lining, a folded satellite uplink, military-grade encryption chip, and a badge, UN Blue. But the seal was wrong, fake. The materials were too clean, too perfect. Not humanitarian, intelligence. Yarrow moved fast. "Now," he said into his mic. Claire had just reached the boarding ramp when she was stopped. One man blocked the passage. Another took her arm. She didn't resist, didn't panic, just turned her head slowly and locked eyes with Yarrow as he approached. "This is a mistake," she said softly, almost amused. Then came the moment no one expected. Traore stepped out of the SUV, crossed the tarmac alone, and walked directly to her. No guards, no press, just the president of the transition, staring down. A woman the world believed to be a saint. She leaned in, her voice barely audible. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed." Traore froze, her breath still warm on his cheek. For a full second, the air around them thickened with something unspoken. Then his voice, flat and final. "Take her in, alive." Claire sat in the holding room beneath the presidential compound, her hands unshackled, her eyes sharp. The walls were bare concrete, the air stale, the silence deliberate. She hadn't asked for a lawyer. She hadn't asked for anything. She just waited. Captain Yarrow watched her from behind the mirrored glass, unease crawling under his skin. Traore had ordered no interrogation. Not yet. Just observation. But it wasn't the spycraft that unsettled Yarrow. It was her calm, her certainty. As if this arrest was always part of her plan. President Traore entered without ceremony. No security, no press, just him. A folder under his arm and the weight of a nation in his gaze. Claire looked up, folding her hands as if greeting a guest. "You've been busy," he said, dropping the folder onto the table. Photos spilled out. Burned convoys, bombed villages, intercepted calls, satellite coordinates. Her trail mapped like a crime scene. She glanced down, then back up. "You know those weren't my decisions," she replied. Traore leaned in. "Then whose were they?" Claire didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a thin envelope from her sleeve and slid it across the table. Yarrow stiffened behind the glass. Traore opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear, of a secret meeting between a French oil executive, a Sahelian rebel leader, and a man wearing the insignia of a European peacekeeping unit. "You were never the target," Claire said, voice low. "You were the pawn." Traore's jaw clenched. The pieces were shifting. She wasn't just feeding intelligence to Paris. She was unraveling it, and maybe, just maybe, trying to burn it down. He stared at her for a long moment, then quietly asked the question that had haunted him for weeks. "Why me?" Claire exhaled. "Because You're the only one they didn't expect to survive. The envelope didn't leave Traoré's sight for the next 12 hours. He locked it in a steel drawer, dismissed his aides, and summoned only one person. Colonel Fauna, chief of counterintelligence, a man who owed him loyalty from the trenches, not the palace halls. By sunrise, a second dossier lay open on the presidential desk. This one thicker, older, dirtier. It wasn't Claire Morrow who was rogue. It was the mission she'd infiltrated. Leaked communications between the French defense attaché and executives from a Paris-based energy consortium detailed covert operations, designed to destabilize the Sahel. The goal? Force resource-starved governments into lopsided mining contracts in exchange for military assistance. The rebels weren't just tolerated. They were assets, controlled chaos, and Claire, embedded to monitor the rebels, yes, but also to gather proof, not for France, for herself, for someone else. One document stood out, a transfer manifest for surveillance drones signed not by French officials, but a European Union humanitarian delegate. Traoré recognized the name. He'd shaken the man's hand in Brussels, smiled for photos. Claire had been feeding multiple channels. The question now wasn't whether she was a spy, it was whose spy. Later that afternoon, Traoré stood alone in the marble hallway outside the cell. "We'll clean them all," said Traoré, "but they'll be judged fairly. We're not like them. We're a state of law." At midnight, when Traoré was alone, he went out to the balcony. Ouagadougou stretched beneath its lights. Celebration sounds were still coming. He took out a small photograph from his pocket. Thomas Sankara's photograph. "We did it, Commander," he whispered late. But we did it. The next morning, French newspapers showed Traoré in their headlines as dictator, thief, terrorist. But no one believed anymore. Images of the 17 suitcases had gone viral on social media. The number 17 suitcases, hashtag trended worldwide. Debates began in the European Parliament. Progressive MPs criticized France. We're in the 21st century. Are you still doing colonialism? Conservative MPs went on the defensive. These are Africa's own internal affairs. But the truth was, Pandora's box had been opened, and it would never close again. A week later, there was a surprise development. A delegation came from France led by an old diplomat, Pierre Foucault, grandson of Jacques Foucault. "We want to talk," he said. "We want to open a new page." Traore accepted, but he had conditions. "The talks will be broadcast live. My people will see everything," Foucault had to accept. When the talks began, Traore took the first word. "First, let's face the past. You had Thomas Sankara killed. Do you admit it?" Foucault spoke after a long silence. "In the past, mistakes were made." "Mistakes?" Traore raised his voice. "Is killing a leader a mistake?" "Okay," said Fall. "Yes, France played a role. We're sorry." This confession was broadcast live to the whole world. It was a historic moment. "Now, let's look to the future," said Traoré. "Burkina Faso is a sovereign country. Our resources are ours. Do you accept this?" "Yes," said Foucault. "We accept. All mining contracts will be cancelled. New ones will be made under fair conditions." "Do you accept? We can discuss," said Foucault. "No," said Tay. "No discussion." "Do you accept?" Foucault called Paris. After a long phone conversation, he returned. "We accept. Your military bases will be closed. Your soldiers will leave." "Our country, this is unacceptable," said Foucault. "Then the talks are over," said Traore, standing up. "Wait," said Foucault. "Okay, we accept." And so, after hours of talks, a historic agreement was signed. Burkina Faso gained full independence. But the story wasn't over. A month later, Laurent Compère tried to cross the Burkina Faso border with 200 mercenaries. Goal: stage a coup, overthrow Traoré. But Traoré was prepared. Intelligence had reported everything in advance. An ambush was set at the border. The clash was brief. The mercenaries surrendered. Laurent Compère was captured. In court, Carrie confessed everything. France gave money, gave weapons, promised support. But they lied. They left me alone. 6 months after the 17 suitcases incident, Burkina Faso's economy showed unexpected growth. Revenues from gold exports were returning to the people for the first time. A school was built in every village. A health center was opened in every neighborhood. Job opportunities were created for unemployed youth. Agricultural projects were started. The international press was amazed. "The Burkina Faso miracle," they wrote. TR said in a speech, "There's no miracle. We're just using our own resources ourselves." It's that simple. The 17 suitcases were moved to a museum. It was named National Independence Museum. Hundreds of visitors came every day. Schools brought students. An old teacher was explaining to students, "Here, children, in these suitcases was our country's stolen future. But our president took it back." A little girl asked, "Teacher, will the French come again?" The teacher smiled. "Even if they come, we're awake now. We won't sleep again." And indeed, Burkina Faso never slept again. The 17 suitcases weren't just money and documents. They were a symbol of awakening, resistance, victory. Years later, history, books would write, "The 17 suitcases incident was the beginning of Africa's second independence movement. The first independence was political, the second was economic, and this time it was real." Traoré went down in history as the leader who opened the 17 suitcases. But he always said, "I just opened the suitcases. The real work was done by my people. They woke up, claimed ownership, fought. The victory is theirs." And Burkina Faso once again lived up to its name, land of upright people. 17 suitcases, 17 million, 17 traders. But in the end, one truth: freedom. That night at the airport, it wasn't just suitcases that were opened. A nation's eyes were opened, and they would never close again. The last word belonged to a little girl. Looking at the 17 suitcases in the museum, she asked her mother, "Mom, is our gold ours now?" "Yes, my daughter," said her mother. "It's ours now. Forever. Forever." And the little girl smiled because she knew she now had a future. A real future. A free future opened by 17 suitcases.